Hey, Prince, and welcome to Volya Radio tonight with Adam and me. How are you doing?
Doing okay. I'm sitting back here pushing a few buttons, making sure that we're all up and running good. And it looks like we are, so that makes me happy. And I should have two co hosts here in a moment, I would hope. And that is fabulous to be able to get everything all going very quickly. Look at that. Look at that. These transition. There we go. I got them on both screens now. As a co-host, hello Adam. How is the Great White North?
It's good. It's very nice today.
Not very white.
No, pretty green.
Good. Um, well, it's a legitimate question. I know how much snow you get. I've stepped off a plane many a time and had my nose hairs freeze.
Yeah, it sucks when it hurts to breathe. That's the
It
worst.
does. It does. And yeah, 'cause it's too cold to go skidooing or, skating on the pond or, any of those things I used to do when I was younger. So, yeah. And then in the summer, horseback riding over to, is it Highway 2, I think. There used to be a gas station with a little restaurant in there, and we would ride horses all the way over to the gas station, tie them up, and go in and have coffee and a piece of pie or a snack in the evening. It was a lot of fun. Anyway, yeah, I think it's time we do a timestamp though. So let's go ahead and figure out what time it is where in the world. And yeah, so it is currently Wednesday, June 3rd in part of the world, but not all the world. So we're going to check out what time it is where in Happy Bottom in the UK, it is 1:02 a.m. And in Wankdorf Stadium in Switzerland, it is 2:02 a.m. At the pirate ship in Ukraine, it is 3:02 a.m. Same for the children's train. And if anybody goes there soon, they better try to get a ride on that train and go visit the pirate ship. The pirate ship's in Ivano-Frankivsk. Just saying. In the workers' paradise of Useless Loop, Australia, it is 8:03 a.m. And in the Kinky University near the Osaka, Japan area, it is 9:03 a.m. In Paradise, Australia, it is 9:33 a.m. Even though they're half an hour off, they think they're in paradise. What is with that? And in Mount Buggery in Australia, it is 10:03 a.m. And of course, now we move to where it is still Tuesday, June 2nd. In Spread Eagle Bay, which is 2 kilometers south of Dildo in Newfoundland, it is 9:33 p.m. And then in Hunky Doodle's Corners, Ontario, it is 8:03 p.m. And in Eyebrow, Saskatchewan, it is 7:04 p.m. And then perhaps one of my favorites, because it just I don't know why. I just, I know you explained it, Adam, but it still just makes me go, what inspired that? In Head Smashed in Buffalo Jump, Alberta, it is 6:04 p.m. In Stoner, British Columbia, it is 5:04 p.m. And then in Coldfoot, Alaska, it is 4:04 p.m. Alaska, where Sarah Palin can see Russia from her house. She's stalking me, and yeah, that's what I know about that. So I hope you all are doing well, and I look forward to Adam and Alan talking us through the next couple of hours and letting us know and bringing us up to date as to what's been happening in Ukraine. We know there was an awful attack last night. Last I saw, 22 were dead and over 100 injured between Ukraine and Dnipro, not Ukraine, sorry, between Kyiv and Dnipro. And I'm sure there were injuries and deaths in other locations. It was a very, very large, large hit with a lot of ballistic missiles. And those, as we know, are the hardest. So, anyway, Adam, Alan, it's good to see you guys. Enjoy your time. I'll be around.
Thanks, Prince. It's great to be here with Adam again on a Tuesday night. Adam, how are you doing? Where do we want to begin?
Well, yeah, we all know what happened last night, and man, all I've been seeing is just photos of the devastation, and it kind of fills up your news feed. And other than that, Marta Kostyuk, the Ukrainian tennis player, or no, that's not her. A Ukrainian tennis player made it to some semifinal today, which is amazing. I like seeing them kick butt or racket butt, I guess, in that case.
And she dedicated her match, of course, to Ukraine with tears in her eyes. But the people in attendance at the stadium stood almost as one in a standing ovation. It strikes me, and by the way, Adam, I think probably most of us are aware that there is a fairly large Ukrainian drone and missile attack outgoing, primarily in the direction of Moscow tonight, not so much in the direction of Crimea.
Is it really?
Yes.
I'm so happy because all of your American friends are there. They all got called in.
Oh,
It was like a compromat call in.
they're all at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, which is such a riot.
Yeah, I really hope Candace Owen has to go run to the shelter underneath the fascist military church that she highlighted yesterday. She didn't show any of the icons of Shoigu and Huila, but maybe she should have shown those as part of her, family values tour of the genocidal giant.
Well, you know, um, we'll get to Maria Belova, I'm sure, in the course of the discussion tonight. But
Did she fall over? No, I heard about her too. Yeah, she signed a new contract, so that's
she's
more
a hold
evidence for the criminal court.
she's a holdover.
Sorry.
I
Oh,
think
you
what
got me there. So, Maria, okay, let me get that tongue twister wrapped up, and then we'll come back to that story. I'll have to practice it while you're talking.
I think what would be fascinating in the St. Petersburg Economic Forum is a Russian gets up and says, especially to the American guests, we don't have any gas any longer in our country because we can't refine it, and there are shortages everywhere. So let's talk about electric vehicles. But before we talk about electric vehicles in Russia, which of course China would supply, uh, it's in the days like we've had, and I'm not just talking about the massive attack on Kyiv last night, but uh, looking at what Ukraine is doing on the battlefield. This is when you thank your lucky stars that you found Ragnar Gudmundsson's daily dashboard, and you open it up and discover there is a new 7-day record that casualties compared to the previous 7 days are up 32%. Okay. So the most recent day was 1,440 Russians killed and wounded, which means that Ukraine is well on its way to getting to the desired 50,000 Russians killed and wounded a month milestone. And I think they will reach it in the month of June. But the other interesting thing when you look at Ragnar's dashboard, and I looked at this quite closely, the number of engagements is rather low, only 249. And what struck me is that a fifth of those engagements are still Russian attacks around Pokrovsk, the city that they had overrun and occupied. A fifth of the Russian daily attacks still occurring in Pokrovsk. That has to mean something.
Well, I don't know what it means. I'm not cool enough to know, but I've just heard rumors that there's some major things happening, and anyone who knows about it is not to talk about it. I don't know anything about it, but I'm excited, and I would just like to encourage the ZSU to please hurry up because I'm waiting for the good news. No, I'm just kidding, of course. I'm excited though.
Well, we don't know exactly what's happening, but in Pokrovsk, it's just a situation where Russia truly doesn't have control of Pokrovsk, and they are continuing to lose plenty of Russians in and around Pokrovsk. They might have fought their way in, now they have to fight their way out, and the Ukrainians are making them pay all along the way, every kilometer. Just the way Ukraine is making ordinary Russians pay by lining up to buy gasoline, if there is any gasoline. So there are now confirmed fuel shortages in Leningrad, Moscow, Tver, and Murmansk oblasts of Russia. And is Tver Oblast where Ekaterinburg is? I don't know, but there's a very funny video of a woman in Ekaterinburg who is desperate to fill her car with gas, and she can't do it. And she has to pay cash, and she says she doesn't have any cash. And so she drives off looking for her fourth gas station.
I didn't see that video. That's excellent. Yeah, so rationing in multiple regions now. The acceleration continues. Um, yeah, it's exciting. I don't know when the next big orc barrage is coming, but we've always seems like the pattern last little while has been we've had a number of days between them, which is another good sign. But yeah, so what so the majority of they're still banging their head against Pokrovsk more than anywhere else. What is this like a situation where Huila just decided that's what he wants and so that's what they're trying to do, or is Pokrovsk is it I can't remember because they've been fighting for it for so long, and I'm sure I heard about it when the Battle of Pokrovsk started before the Battle of Stalingrad. But what exactly, is it a big logistical thing, or is it just the next town on the line? Alan, give me some of your Chuck adjacent knowledge.
It's definitely not logistical. I mean, there are no logistical reasons to think about Pokrovsk, whether you're Ukrainian or Russian, makes no difference. I think it simply has to do with a Russian force that is exhausted trying to hold placements inside Pokrovsk and being hard pressed primarily by drones. And then a few small uh, bands of Russian forces trying to make their way west out of the city, out of Pokrovsk. But there's not much to make their way to. There's farmland, some farm fields, some small villages, a barn or two, and that is honestly where the Russians are trying to get to. Um, and what you expect to see, it is a shift in the number of engagements from Pokrovsk to Kostyantynivka, but we haven't seen that yet. Regardless of the infiltration of Kostyantynivka, the highest number of engagements are taking place 50 kilometers away in Pokrovsk, with nowhere for the Russians to go there.
Well, I love it. I was just looking up the meaning of Pokrovsk, like what the, because I don't, but I do know that the word krov is blood. And so in my mind, I was like, is there a meaning? Like, does the original meaning of the town's name have something to do with blood? But it actually means protection or intercession. So, like, yeah, intervening to protect someone, I guess, in Church Slavonic, Old Church Slavonic, which is the precursor of many Slavic languages. So, yeah. But, yeah, blood, anyways, lots of it.
Yeah, lots of it, lots of Russian blood, no question about that. So the other interesting news that got my attention over the last few days, uh, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine is reporting that there's a definite increase in innovation in the month of May alone. The Ministry of Defense authorized 175 new weapons and military equipment models for operational use. It means that now, whichever of these 175 things that are produced can go right to the front line. They've been tested, they've been proven. Um, and that shows the speed of Ukrainian innovation. It's one way to tell that in this war of innovation, Ukraine is winning. Adam, let's go see what's on Zdenka's mind.
Hi, guys. I was just going to add to the name Pokrovsk. So it's linked with Mary, the Mother Mary of Jesus, and that she provides protection. So it does mean cover rather than blood, Adam. And I speak another Slavic language, which is Croatian. And Pokrov actually is used like for roof or like the lid of a pot. So it's used as cover. And I just looked up blood in Ukrainian. It is krov. Yeah, and in Croatian it's krv. But anyway, there you go. That was all I wanted to add.
Well, I wanted to now mean about blood, orc blood specifically. That's neat. And I didn't know that you spoke Croatian too. That's badass.
Pa da, ja pričam hrvatski. Ciao.
Wow.
Yeah, and I love the language correlations and the pot cover. I just, when you said that, Zdenka, I imagined, when you cooking a big dinner and you put on a pot of water to boil and you come back, and it's all like boiling over, and then you go put a lid on it and turn it down, and yeah, you'd say "Sweet Mother of Mary," and as you put the lid on, maybe that's how it started.
But just a few more words, Adam, about the pace of innovation in Ukraine. And this is all coming from the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. So I don't think that they are, I don't think they're breaking any secrets or anything like that. They are simply, in a way, by making this announcement, putting the pressure on Russia uh, to equal this pace of innovation. So 60 new models of unmanned aerial systems are authorized for operational use. And remember, Ukraine designs unmanned vehicles for specific missions. It's not just to fly farther, to fly faster, to carry more explosives, etc. They have a specific mission in mind. And we can also see that with Ukraine increasing its number of what are called mid range strikes all across the front line, these are aimed at Russia's ground lines of communications and supply. A lot of these new drones are specifically designed for that. My guess is a lot of these new drones are using AI to choose the final target. And that would be they can use AI to identify types of Russian trucks on the road. The other thing that struck me, 40 new types of ammunition. Pretty interesting. 18 new models of armored vehicles. And my guess here is that a lot of these are actually unmanned ground vehicles, unmanned ground robots. So I think we'll see plenty more Russians surrendering just to robots, which I absolutely love to see, Adam.
I do love to see it. I love the innovation. I love, we all believed that Ukrainians could do this, and it's been a horrible journey. Like, watching our friends over there pay in blood of civilians basically for this innovation. But right from the start, you could kind of see this spark, and I just, yeah, it's satisfying to have believed something in your heart like that, like, oh, these guys got this 6 years ago, 4 years ago now, and to see it come to fruition, it kind of makes days like today a little easier, because all I've been seeing is videos of families being pulled out from the rubble, and I hate it, and I hate Russia more all the time. Go ahead, Bruce.
Hey guys, on the innovation front, have you talked about this? I saw it. I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, but the Pentagon is kind of slowly waking up to two things. I think one is the fact that like the nature of warfare has completely changed when it went with drones in the picture, and the other is Chuck talks about this all the time. Our sort of procurement innovation cycle for new weapons is just laboriously slow. And one of the things I saw is that the Pentagon has created a contest called Drone Dominance, and where they're literally going out to hobbyists and startup companies, the prize is a 1.1 billion, a part of 1.1 billion in defense contracts. I'm reading now that a sum the Pentagon hopes will be enough to buy 300,000 of what are essentially cheap flying bombs, drones. So the Pentagon's realizing that the traditional ways in which we developed and conceptualized weapons is just out the window, and that they've got to try a new approach. And I think they're seeing what Ukraine's doing with this incredible feedback loop, like from the front line directly to the little drone workshop somewhere, right back to the front line. And that seems to be the way of the future, at least at this level of weapons.
Completely the way of the future, Bruce. I think it was the Wall Street Journal that reported the United States can manufacture today about 100,000 drones annually, and Ukraine is able to produce 7 million to 10 million drones annually. I mean, there's something that the United States could learn there, don't you think?
Oh, 100%. And since the fall of the Cold War, since the end of the Cold War, and I don't have the exact figure in front of me, but I think we've basically gotten down to about five major defense contractors. So we have I think the war in Iran, or the war against Iran, and the war in Ukraine is kind of exposing is something that a lot of us didn't realize about our defense industrial complexes, is that it's gotten kind of stagnant and stale. And as much as I despise our current Secretary of Defense, at least some kudos to the DoD for trying to shake things up.
Well, look, So the big defense contractors in the United States, we all know who they are, from Raytheon to Boeing to Lockheed Martin, etc. But they actually support uh, a pretty rich segment of innovative, I'll call them craftsmen, because that's what they are. Thousands of craft shops all over the country that design and produce specific parts that are then assembled by the big boys. So it's one way to look at the defense industry in the United States. It is monopolistic with five or so huge defense contractors, but underneath that, thousands of smaller mom and pop contractors actually make um, defense manufacturing in the United States work.
Right, but they all work under a system that's bloated, right? I mean, there's so much money that goes, and there's so many lavish dinners and conferences in Vegas and all of this stuff that's part of this bloated system. I would love to be a mom and pop shop like that, because that is a mom and pop shop where, everyone has their individual thing, but I strongly agree with Bruce's point, is that, and I'm not a very conservative guy, but that's the sort of thing that destroys competition and is a monopoly, or approaching a monopoly, and it's not how you get innovation from the greatest government system and the greatest you know financial systems in history. It's how you end with stagnation. And yeah, let the mom and pops kind of like shove off the Lockheed Martins and see what they can offer, without daddy complaining about people printing drones in their kitchens and being worried about it. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, that's nice to hear, Bruce. However, I would be suspect, and my pick for the United States as far as mom and pops is BAE Systems. Um, Even though they're just stagnant right now, they go up and down. But I really like the fact that they do a lot of independent contractors throughout the country to do work. Um, Anyways, I just wanted to add that I'd be suspect of any stuff that comes out of Pentagon right now, because I just, something tells me that Stank Jr. and Eric might have something to do with it in their companies, after reading what they tried to do, undercut, the other contractors that make drones throughout the world with their little operation, and it's all insider trading. So I'd be very suspect of buying anything from with the Trump name on it, for fear it would fall apart in 2 seconds. That's just my opinion. Thank you.
I would share your opinion, Dan. Bruce, what do you think?
I will never suggest that this current administration is not corrupt and corrupt in flabbergasting ways. So yeah, it is a point well taken. But there are legitimate startups out there. One's called Gecko, um, that are again, it's a Western Pennsylvania company, and they're just trying to re-envision the way that we build weapons and do um, uh, innovation, and hopefully some good old fashioned American entrepreneurship is still out there, and maybe in 2029 with a different group of people in the DoD, we might see some actual progress.
I would hope so. Yeah, my fear is that the Trump boys would get a big drone contract and deliver 1 million drones, but without uh, any helicopter blades, no rotors attached, and they would probably point to the fine print and say, "Well, we said we'd deliver the drone and that you'd have to supply the rotors. Something like that.
Very, very much like the Trump watch, or the Trump phone, for that matter.
Yeah, the Trump watch, a watch delivered uh, without hands, but it's an analog watch, not digital. You need the hands to tell the time. And the Trump phone, I don't know, maybe it came with a dial instead of push buttons, or I don't know. There's something called a touch screen today, isn't there? Something like that.
Yes, I'm not gonna lie. You can't read everything because it's a fire hose of shit. But at least one of these things, it was either the watch or the phone. They literally misspelled Trump, and I'll see if I can find that and forward it to you.
I love it. I hope they misspelled Trump by adding an F at the end of his name.
Or giving it the backwards Cyrillic R.
That is the best way to spell Trump.
And then it would be pronounced Tiump.
So,
Oh wait, before you move on, I found it.
yeah.
From Fast Company, $600 Trump watch is misspelled. Um, there's no T. It's just called Rump. It's called the Rump watch. Onward.
Well, that also makes sense.
Rump. Make up your own jokes, folks, as mockers would say.
You know who is dying to talk about fuel shortages everywhere you look in Russia, but especially in Crimea, and uh, how Ukraine is succeeding in cutting off Russian logistics practically everywhere. It's Will Thiel, but he's just hanging out. He's probably poolside in the workers' paradise. Uh, but, there have been just in the last 30 odd days at least 25 fuel trucks struck by Ukrainian drones in Crimea or on their way to Crimea. And so that is a fuel truck a day. Now you have to believe that the gas and especially the diesel uh, is not going to be given to Crimean citizens, those who want to get out. Uh, they should really be planning to get out sooner rather than later. It's all going to be hoarded for the military needs, not just in Crimea, but in Kherson, Zaporizhia, in Donetsk and Luhansk. I just can't wait to see the big payoff for this strategic Ukrainian campaign that has now been going on for really, I'm going to say 3 full years. I think the first drone strike on a Russian refinery might have been at the very end of 2022, but it really started in 2023, I think. And and Will can set me straight on that, can't you, Will?
Yeah, there was some incidental strikes on that looked like testing in 2022, but the real the first of the refinery campaigns commenced with what could not be mistaken for anything else than a strike on the vacuum column in Tuapse at the end of 2023. And then there was a rash of them then the United States intervened and it didn't read Beefeater and listened to me and said to Ukraine they needed to slow that down. This is the Biden administration because they said it would affect gasoline prices in America. Totally wrong. But then in then when Trump won, the refinery and crude oil export started being attacked in earnest by Ukraine. Up until the point of time when March 25th of 2025, when they decided to take a pause because they said they were unilaterally going to stop strikes um, on oil and gas things in return for hopefully Russia stopping its strikes on um, electricity generation. But that, of course, didn't happen. So that in August, while I was in Ukraine in 2025, the campaign started in earnest, and this time, when they started the refinery campaign, they were able to compress into about 3 weeks what the damage they had done over 3 months back in 2023-24. And if you look at this latest iteration that started about 4 weeks ago, they were actually able to compress the amount of damage they did in the 3 weeks in August through the 3 weeks in August 10th through the end of August into September. They were able to compress that 3 weeks of damage into literally 1 week. And what we see, the most important thing about these strikes now is, with the degradation of air defense in the temporarily occupied areas and moving into the southern regions of the western regions of Russia, now you see multiple drones getting through to each refinery rather than just one. And you see them going to be able to return to refineries like Yaroslavl. If they don't get everything on one day, they come back the next day because they've degraded the air defense enough that they're able to act with a level of permissiveness that you'd almost call impunity. And this is how you result in the Ruzzian refinery getting struck in 5 separate locations on the same day. And that limits the capability of the Russian refineries to have any resilience at all. Sometimes if you get struck in your catalytic reformer, you can isolate that unit and start blending gasoline out of another way, and maybe ramp up your straight run gasoline out of your distillation column. But if 3 of the process units are hit and some of the connection points between those process units are hit at the same time, not only do you have a fire or multiple fires inside a refinery that are basically nightmare fuel to somebody like Firefella, but you also have the capability that any resiliency of that refinery to shift around production means and carry on producing some fuels is reduced, which is why now when we see Ukrainian refineries get hit, like Volgograd the other day, they do shut down. And they're totally down, totally cold. I'm not sure. I can look at firms this morning, but in the month of May, we had Kirishi, Yaroslavl, Ryazan, Sirzan, and Perm all down at the same time at one time. Basically 40% of the Russian 40% of Russian refining capacity is offline cold. And you get what you get, right? You get Yekaterinburg, where they're out of fuel. Crimea has gone from restrictions on fuel to 20 liters to rationing of fuel only with coupons to today, civilians get no fuel whatever. None at all, Alan. The governor has announced 0 fuel for civilian purposes at all in diesel and gasoline. And Russia 2 days ago finally pulled the trigger on export of jet fuel because they're so short on that. The summer flying season is on. Diesel use is up. Gasoline use is up always this season. And Russia is not exporting any gasoline. Only primary producers are allowed to export any diesel fuel. And jet fuel is now also off the menu until November 1st. So this campaign, they're able to further concentrate the pain on Russia. And this time, not only are they hitting the refinery, the capacity far at a distance, with also striking the smaller fuel depots up close to the front, which they've been doing all along, but further reducing those. You have no wide spots in the line to hold fuel. The only fuel that's coming is the stuff that's in tankers or rail cars, and as you say, those are now being picked off. So it's a really concentration of the pain up toward the front lines from a really well planned strategic and mid-range and short-range strike campaign. It's really a thing of beauty to watch.
It's a great thing
Well,
of beauty. Adam, go ahead.
Will, a few weeks ago, heard about a spike in the shut-ins of wells in Siberia, the ones that are hard to start because it's either I don't know why it's hard to start, just the cold. I'm a complete layman on that front, but
No, it has to do with the when you relax the flow out of a subsurface reservoir, the flow is helping keep the well the fissures open, and when you relax and close in that well, it all sets in as stopped as inertia, and when you reopen the well up, oftentimes, especially these West Siberian wells, they only come up to about half the production they had beforehand. And yeah, there are probably in the range of 1,000 wells in West Siberia now that have been closed in.
so it's not exponential yet, but there's quite a bit more from that initial spike, because I remember seeing something like it was 400 in a month, which was the highest ever in years or something like that, but I hadn't heard anything after that.
Well, you haven't heard anything, but remember, after that first 400 wells was shut in, when they knocked out the capability of Yaroslavl and Kurishi to take that fuel and struck the pumping stations toward Primorsk and Usluga, since that time, the linear production station at Kirov's been knocked out. The linear production station at Perm has been knocked out, so that West Siberian crude now really doesn't have any place to go, because the refineries that would take it close are offline, and there's no capability to pump it to Ust-Luga and Primorsk, so they have to shut them in.
And just before going to dry fly, Adam and Will, I want to mention one other thing as a kind of a sidelight, but that is the frequency of Ukrainian attacks, not only on Russia's oil refineries, but uh, on its ports like Novorossiysk, and on air defense in Crimea, elsewhere, inside Russia itself. Remember, really, it was only a matter of a few months ago that Ukraine was able to launch hundreds of drones into Russia every maybe 7 days, let's say 7 to 10 days. But now it has become a nightly affair for Ukraine to launch hundreds of drones and cruise missiles against targets in occupied Ukraine and inside Russia. Uh, so that tells you Ukrainian defense manufacturing is keeping up the pace, if not increasing it. It tells you that Ukraine now has a variety of drones to choose from, and therefore it can pursue a variety of missions every single night and can select many more targets to strike. Its target list is increasing every single day. And the third thing it tells you is the Russians have been unsuccessful in finding any of these Ukrainian manufacturing points anywhere. And it's because they are so well dispersed, they are so well hidden. And that means that the Russians do what they always do, they fall back on a pure terror campaign aimed at Ukrainian civilians. It's you know, and I agree with you, Adam. It is difficult to open your news feed on a day like today, and see all that footage. It's what I call a 9/11 every single day in Ukraine, but the recovery from it, the hundreds of first responders who are out all over Ukraine saving survivors from the rubble. It is no different than what occurred on 9/11. It happens in Ukraine almost every day. Adam, let's go to dry fly.
Hi. I was just going to make a quick. Can you hear me? I'm out in my garden. I don't know.
Loud and clear so far,
Good.
dry fly.
Good. I had 2 points real quick. The first one is on innovation in small U.S. manufacturers. That is some truth to that, but don't expect it from the guys that are supplying Raytheon or Boeing or any of those guys. And the reason is they're parts makers. They make stuff to print, period. They don't have the design teams and innovation that you see amongst Ukrainian companies. So we would have to absolutely learn from the Ukrainians on how to do that. I'm telling you, I've lived in that world. I've represented those kind of companies. I've been involved in those contracts. My father actually did it too, and he actually had a contract with a big defense company where he told him the part was wrong. It'll fail. It won't do what you're asking it to do. And the general who was involved in the program said, make the goddamn thing to print and ship it to us on time or we'll sue you. So they made it to print, shipped it on time, and the damn thing failed in testing. And then they were all mad that we didn't tell him, but he had all the documentation to show them that, yeah, we told you, which is almost the worst thing to do because they never got another contract from that team again. They were supposed to fall on their sword or something. American defense contractors, subcontractors, are notorious for following orders, just like they were, some kind of blind military unit just off into the wilderness. So don't expect it from them. They're going to have to do a sea change. If you're going to look for innovation in like UAVs and stuff, look for the commercial UAV startups. They're far more innovative, and I've seen both, and they really are. The other thing I was going to say is that we all talk about process units, and I was a chemical engineer when I first started. Now I never did petroleum like Will, but I worked in a very complex biochemical process, and people all on this side and other sides, not you guys particular, but people who call in are all poo-pooing that they only blew up a tank or they did this. When they're doing workarounds like Will described, where you've lost a couple process units and you're trying to repipe and reconfigure, you cannot believe how important having storage tanks you can go into and come out of. They're both the feed tank and the intermediate product tanks that can allow you to keep those processes limping along. If you blow up all those tanks, I can tell you, there's almost zero chance that the refinery will be able to get up to speed at any time because they will not have the ability to do that flexibility. Just piping from A to B to C to D won't do it. They'll need to have intermediate storage and holding tanks when they're trying to reroute and refigure and trying to keep the thing from like running, the liquid from running down the street. And I have actually, I've been there and done that.
Yeah, that's why when I was talking about refineries, when we started to shift from people talking about tanks to the process units, I'd said, some tanks inside a refinery are in fact process units, because if this is why when they started targeting the intermediate tanks into OPSA, I said that's a fantastic idea, specifically because of what you said. They need to have intermediate storage because not all the unit operations run at the same production rate or produce the same percentages of material that they need to mix together to make the different fuels. And so, yeah, tanks aren't tanks. Some tanks are mixing tanks, like in linear production stations that are unit operations that are good high priorities. Some tanks in strategic storages like Engels are important strategic targets because there are vast quantities of aviation fuel stored there. And some tanks inside refineries are the intermediate product tanks, which are very important and would be priority targets if you are done hitting the process units itself.
I actually worked in some of those scenarios. For example, we would have units that would go down or need repair or replacement or something like that. And one of my jobs as a young chemical engineer, fresh out of college, was to go line out the process and to see how much space do we have, feed into A, product out of A into B, B into C, and how much holding, so I could give the maintenance team exactly how much time they had to be able to do a fix before we had to either shut down or we had product running down the street. And
here's another point that's interesting about this. You just said you were doing that. These days, there are there's computer modeling that's running all the time in the process units or in the control rooms. But I don't think Russia's doing all that. Russia's still doing a lot of what you described, which is engineers having to go in and do these sorts of setups for them in the intermediate. And remember that Moscow refinery that was hit during the Moscow strikes? And they haven't reported it as any significant damage, but Russia reported that a number of people were killed in that Moscow strike, they hit the control room at that Moscow refinery for several of the units. And so this is where the people in those refineries can sometimes be important. The refinery shut down only briefly, but the next time they hit those refinery process units, they won't have anybody in there probably with the level of experience to be able to do that, the setups and temporary lineouts. So that's also an important thing inside the people that get killed or have been sent to the war. All those people will make a difference in refining as
The other
well.
thing, one last thing I'll say is that the other thing is that we did have some computer systems, and they worked pretty well until you tried to do jerry rig seat of your pants changes. So you're on the fly doing all these changes. Guess what? The computer is modeled against something else. It's against what you had, not what you have now. So you blow a bunch of shit up and you wreck a lot of units. Guess what? That computer is not going to be able to tell you, oh yeah, you've got tank A, tank B, and it's going to go from this unit to that unit. No, those units don't exist anymore. So now what do you do? And then if you kill the guys who can do the calculations, well, you're doubly screwed. So it's all a beautiful thing. And I just wanted to add some color to that because I'd lived that, and I can just imagine the the headaches those young engineers are having. And they're going to get the right answer. Quote: they're going to try, because if they f it up, they're going to be doing a meat wave in Pokrovsk. And I'll listen.
Well, Chuck and I are going to be taking a look at some maps later this week, likely actually on Thursday. And of course, we will return to Pokrovsk, but we will also be looking very closely at what is happening in Kostyantynivka, where Russians have succeeded in infiltrating some of the neighborhoods on the outskirts of Kostyantynivka. But again, what is striking to me when I look at what I call Ragnar's heat map, uh, it's most intense still around Pokrovsk. And how long has it been since the Russians said they uh, conquered and occupied Pokrovsk? It's something like 6 weeks. They've had 6 weeks in which to redeploy troops up to Kostyantynivka, up to what has always been expected to be this summer's hotspot, the eastern fortress cities, and we haven't yet seen that. So I'm intrigued by what is happening there. Scout Green, welcome, and go ahead, please.
Yeah, I when I put my hand up, it jumped ahead. How far back was the discussion about the refineries?
Oh, it wasn't far back at all. The great thing about having Will Thiel on Volya Radio is we are always talking about refineries.
Okay, well, here's the question I had for Will, uh, and perhaps Dryfly. I know that when I was working in the chemical process area, the movement of oil around the plant in the various tanks had a lot to do with the supply of nitrogen that we use to keep the gas from escaping in various ways. And I'd just be interested in Will's take on if there was a lack of nitrogen supply at a refinery, how that would impact their vulnerability. Is that a weird question?
No, it's not that weird a question. Nitrogen blanketing is used to prevent a flammable gases from building up with oxygen to a point where you get an explosive mixture. So they tend to nitrogen blank. Nitrogen's not that difficult to separate from air. So I don't suppose they're that concerned about nitrogen blanketing. But the thing to look for in the refineries that they target that will cause them a problem is hydrogen, because anytime you're looking in a refinery and you want to find out like where the hydrotreaters are and stuff, the little balls, look for the little things that look like ping pong balls, because hydrogen is obviously the smallest molecule of natural gases, and you have to store those in very high pressure containers, which of course a sphere is the strongest of metal structure you can use to hold hydrogen in. So they tend to hold them in little spheres. And if you look for those little round spheres, they'll be adjacent to a hydrotreating unit. Some units, like catalytic reformers, produce hydrogen and send it to hydrogen storage. Others use hydrogen, like hydrocracking and fizz breaking and things like that. So the balance of hydrogen inside a modern refinery is probably more critical than nitrogen, and targeting those hydrogen storage containers would also be, in my opinion, one of the key things to target inside a refinery if you were looking for a very sympathetic target that would cause significant problems.
So if I were a drone pilot and I couldn't find my original target and I found a big round spherical tank, that would be not a bad second choice. Is that what you're telling me?
True, and it's not a big round secondary target. It'll be like 4, 5, or 6 small things that are maybe 10 or 15 meters across.
Okay, just that. Thank you for clarification.
And thanks for coming up with that question, Scouts. Much appreciated. It's always a good thing when Will is with us to use his expertise. And his expertise is not only in looking at how Ukraine is taking out Russian oil refining capacity, roughly 40%. I happen to feel it must be much more than 40% interdicted now. But Will also is reliable when it comes to looking at what is really happening inside Russia. How nervous are ordinary Russians getting, and what are they likely to do in the midst of their anxiety? I always used to say, Will, what's the price of Gretchka? But Gretchka doesn't mean so much anymore inside Russia, does it?
Oh no, it still does. Gretsch is still a staple, but like everything else, a lot of these basic foodstuffs have gone up 30% year on year, and so they belie the official inflation rate of something like 5.5% or whatever like that, and they haven't been able to control inflation with interest rates for more than 6 months. Navalny has been prevented from doing that, and actually they've reduced the rates to try to make uh, capital make liquidity a little more easy in Russia, despite the inflationary problems that it's having. But people, here's what's happening with in the regions now is the price of gasoline is not necessarily becoming as big a problem for people because they're literally selling their cars and not getting new cars. Again, it's back to the old days of catching public transport and walking, and delaying a new car or a new or used car purchase because the fuel is just too exorbitant these days, and the recycling fees on the cars if you want to get a new one. Maintenance is difficult. It's just automobile ownership is becoming a real burden to many middle income Russians. And so when I've contacted my recent contacts about what the price of fuel was, they said they didn't know because they actually don't have a car anymore. This is where we're going, Alan. But they still need Gretchka, and they still need flour, eggs, butter, sugar, and those are increasingly being the shelf space in Russian stores is now at least 30% Chinese product, which was unbelievable compared to the early 2000s.
Wow. And last week, a couple weeks ago, I was reading a lot about the possibility of runs on Russian banks, that individual Russians are trying to take out as many rubles as possible. Uh, First of all, in expectation of limits being put on how much you can removed from your account. Secondly, the possibility that accounts will be seized by the state. And thirdly, just fears about the insolvency of Russian banks. Yeah, has there been a run on Russian banks yet, and would we expect one?
Well, there's a slow motion run going all from last year. You know, look at the withdrawals that are being made. More banks, or more people have withdrawn rubles. The volume of rubles withdrawn from Russian banks in the first 4 months of this year exceeded the entire volume removed last year. So and it started in earnest, like oftentimes bank runs do, as you say, when they started limiting withdrawals to 50,000 rubles. People started taking 50,000 every day. Your salary shows up, and for the 3 days after your salary shows up, you withdraw every bit that you possibly can and keep it on hand. Look at that girl in Yekaterinburg. The internet shuts down. You got to buy everything with cash. You got to have cash. So people are hoarding more cash. And they're also still storing dollars and euros to hedge against the inflation and hyperinflation that's definitely coming for the ruble as well. And what I wish we could still see, and the things that I'm asking about when I talk to Russians these days, is what are the local crime reports telling you? Are break-ins at houses and apartments happening in greater numbers? Because this is what I said would be a signal of late stage problems in Russia, when home invasions to get at this cash that's stored at home, not in banks anymore, because they don't trust it. It'll become a honeypot for petty crime.
Bruce, go ahead.
Will, one of the things you mentioned, hyperinflation coming up, it's worth remembering that for the last 4 years, Russia's been dealing with inflation that would bring down a U.S. government. I mean, I think it's come down a little bit, but they were hitting 10 and 12% inflation with interest rates up at 20%. I mean, in the West, we just haven't seen anything like that since maybe that like 79, early 80s. So I mean, a bout of hyperinflation is coming on top of a lot of brutal pain that people have been suffering there.
That's true. I mean, we're not to hyperinflation yet, but we're definitely in serious inflation mode because Russia is opaque and no longer reports this sort of data. For 2 years now, we have to look at surrogates to determine what they are, and to basically get a basket of goods that people would need, and find out what they cost directly in Russia. But you're right. For instance, Bruce, right now, in the far east of Russia, a liter of petrol, the cost of gasoline for your car is the equivalent of $4.10 US a gallon. Now, $4.10 US a gallon probably is about what average people in America are paying right now. But Russians make on average one quarter of the salary that Americans make. So, what sort of catastrophe would it be in America, where I think you're from, if a gallon of gasoline costs $13 or $14 a gallon? Because it's been that way for weeks.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
You'd have a revolution on your hand if it was $13 a gallon gasoline in America.
Yeah, I mean, Americans don't realize, I think, that we actually pay comparatively little for gasoline compared with our industrial counterparts. But yeah, it's a very good point.
Comparatively little is a way of saying Americans pay next to nothing for the gasoline that they put in their cars and trucks. Uh, the other thing, in terms of the fragility of the Russian economy. I think that is worth talking about. Is that it is the economic policy that seems to be where criticism of Putin and the by implication the cost of his war against Ukraine. This seems to be permissible criticism of the Putin regime, but it's still significant because uh, um, it's what I might call man in the street criticism, right? Well, every other kind of criticism has been completely shut down, but it's okay to talk about economic policy.
Yeah, that's right. It's a surrogate for pointing out, pointing out individuals. They talk about the systems of problems that are endemic throughout the country, and yeah, that's it's still open season to complain about the economy. Uh, Given the fact that everybody knows you're complaining about the people who control the economy.
Well, it's certainly worth watching. You can all.
I'll tell you what, it's going to be great watching. So today, right now, in about 4 more hours, the first of the sessions will open up in St. Petersburg for the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, and this is the first year that the United States, since 2018, has sent a delegation. Yeah, the Americans have sent a
The
delegation to the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, and
the
today.
ballroom commissioner will.
Well, yeah, he's a fine arts guy, right? Yeah. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to the things that come out of the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, formally and informally, Alan, because some of the speakers at the plenary sessions last year gave, damning and problematic statements that were refuting what Putin had said the day before, and that started a cascade of industrialists speaking the truth into the camera over the last year, and we'll see what happens this year. Dryfly yesterday had said that he believes that the formal speeches will be heavily cracked down on this year, and that may be the case. But imagine the corrosive nature of some of the industrialists speaking out in these sessions, getting out in little blurbs alongside of excerpts of the absolute hubris that will be shown at the cocktail parties and the things that go on the side. You know, the St. Petersburg Economic Forum was known for its Las Vegas level of excess typically before, and any of that, because the rich people still want to have all that, any of that sneaking out juxtaposed with actual statements of the economic situation, plus any, as Adam and I were fan fictioning last night, any attacks that can take place on Ust-Luga and Primorsk or Moscow at the same time that the St. Petersburg Economic Forum is going on will be very good juxtaposition of imaging that will be assisting in corroding support for the war inside Russia.
Well, Putin.
What's the average drone flight time from the edge of Ukraine to Moscow? Because when we started our session, there's a whole bunch flying right now. Has anyone heard anything? I've had my eyeballs peeled, but
Yeah,
golly.
they should be arriving around nowish, but it's about 4 hours, I believe, 4.5 hours flight time.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll give them their time to fly, but I just want to tell Santa Claus that I will be a good boy all year, and if I could please get a video of the Tate brothers falling on their face and then ripping out the seat of their pants as they run to the bomb shelter from their little cocktail party. And I promise I will do all my homework and brush my teeth. Bruce, your hand was up, but is it still?
No, you guys should keep going.
I was going to say, ho, ho, ho.
There he is. I hear the jingle bells. It's Christmas in June. Go ahead, Dryfly.
I was just going to comment on Will's take. I don't know if you read Prune a couple hours ago, like 4 hours ago. She put up a piece on, quote, Russia, quote, the Academy of Sciences has canceled its forecast for an economic downturn following Putin's demand to end the recession. That was today. Well, the second. Today for me, yesterday for you. It's already starting. Putin demanded an end to the recession, and the Academy of Sciences in Russia has canceled his forecast for an economic downturn.
I demand you end this snowstorm
Yeah,
immediately,
that's
sir.
that level of power is like a wet dream for Trump, isn't it? That you could just demand a recession quit.
He kind of has in some respects because he's doctoring the a lot of the readings or delaying them or obscuring them. So the reality is people feel like it's a recession, but the numbers say it isn't. And Putin is doing exactly the same. Now, the difference is that if you go against Putin, he will literally send you to Siberia. Trump just wishes he could, at least so far. And I think that is somewhat of a difference. But anyone thinks anything out of this St. Petersburg conference, economic conference, is going to be anything other than a clown show, I think isn't paying attention. Last year was an anomaly. They said the dirty parts out loud, and I would be willing to bet they've spent a year regretting it. Many of those people have spent a year or more regretting it. I expect it's going to be nothing but Skittles and rainbows and ponies, unicorns, all of it, dancing and flowers and everybody happy because they've had a year to get their act together, meaning the FSB and the uh, um, the finance department, the Ministry of Finance. All of those people have got their act together. So I don't think you're going to see anything other than everything's great. And then you have Candace Owens going on Twitter and Facebook and whatever, saying that yep, how beautiful Russia is and how everything works. So I would be preparing people for that likelihood, just because I think last year was an anomaly, and I'll listen.
Except with drones and black tar rain, I hope, coming in about an hour. But yeah, that's a pretty the cancel of the recession. You, sir, I demand, you weather commissioner, please get rid of this tsunami. It's messing with my day immediately. Go ahead, Dan, and then Will.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Dry fly. It just perplexes me sometimes why you guys are just too formal. You know, Trump learned from the best crook in the business, and that was Russia, Putin. So I'm not surprised. He's learned how to fudge the books for years. That's where he's been getting his money all these years. So they're both of them, Putin and Trump. Whatever they tell us about the economy or unemployment, he's fudging the books. It's evident to everybody here in this country. So I don't know why there isn't more screaming over here or over in Russia. They're both crooks, but I call it fudging the books, New Jersey style. Thank you.
Well, this is true, Dan. Let's go back to Will Thiel, please. Go ahead, Will.
Tiny little addition to our discussion on oil and gas is in trolling through my news over the last 14 hours since I was on. There's a couple of interesting minor things that you might otherwise pass over, but I think are indicative of what we were talking about before. Take out the refineries and then move toward the front with the capability to supply things. The Novoshakhtinsk refinery was struck yesterday afternoon with Neptune missiles, meaning they're aiming at very precisely at something inside that refinery, and it may well be the tankage because that refinery is so close to the front, like the depots that have been hit recently. And I'll also note that they attacked the rail the product loading onto rail tankers area of the of the Slavyansk na Kuban refinery in Krasnodar. So that's relatively close to the front and shows attacks on fuel distribution, not crude, but final fuel distribution. And finally, the last one that shouldn't be missed is there was an attack in Bryansk on the Unechka distribution center, which is also loads fuel onto rail cars for distribution. So, if they're not getting the refinery, they're getting the storage and the large scale transport by trains. And then when it gets into the temporarily occupied territories, it's basically making the thunder run from the gas farm to the bullet farm in Mad Max.
And just to pick up on a point that Will made earlier about um, the total suspension of fuel sales in Sevastopol and in Crimea. You know, if you were to look at a map, Sevastopol is about the last stop on the transport route, whether well, uh, by road or by railroad, I guess, but certainly by road. It's the first stop if you're going by sea, but the Russians can't do that across the Black Sea anymore. So this is, to me, a warning signal that these most distant supply stops for the Russians, of course, are the most vulnerable. But here's one already in Crimea, totally suspending fuel sales. You look at the map of occupied Ukraine, and you'll notice that Kherson on the left bank of the Dnipro is the other most distant, and it's actually an endpoint of Russian supply. If Sevastopol is having this fuel suspension, just imagine what is happening to the Russian forces occupying this distant, far reach of Kherson Oblast. It really it spells relief for the Ukrainians. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, question. Has anybody seen, and I'm only getting bits and pieces, but has anybody got any information or seen anything on Telegram of just civilians, Russian civilians living in uh, Crimea, trying to evacuate out of there anymore lately? Thank you.
I haven't seen anything about that, but I will take a look, and it's certainly something worth looking for. But I don't know about that, Dan.
I hope they're good swimmers, though.
You know, just to go back for a moment to the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. Uh, Ordinarily, this is one of the public forums where Putin makes an appearance and pretends to take questions from the press. I think he's frequently done this in the past. It will be really interesting to see if Putin goes to St. Petersburg and takes so-called questions from the Russian press. We all know that these questions are pre-prepared. Putin knows each and every question by heart and has had time to practice his answers. This might be something we want to try for Trump. I don't know. But in other words, if Putin doesn't appear at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, that is a further indication of the fear he lives in. And we'll go to Bruce.
Hey, slightly different topic, but in some ways it's all connected. What do you make of I'm seeing it on Yahoo News. It came out a couple other places where the headline is Zelensky has instructed officials to try and end the war as soon as possible, preferably before winter. With Budanov saying, this is the president's instruction, and we think we can achieve that objective. And I've seen some other tidbits and stories indicating that maybe the Zelensky government believes that things will be bad enough for Putin that he might come to the negotiating table by winter. I mean, what do you make of these stories? Ukraine to me doesn't generally spout off bullshit, so that there's got to be something behind it. But I was curious your or Will's take on that.
It's an interesting proposition. I think that the way I would read it at the moment, frankly, it is Zelensky PR. It's Zelensky finding another opportunity to try to reassure Donald Trump from kind of outside the negotiating process that he is still the one who is most in favor of peace and is willing to do anything to achieve peace. Now, I certainly don't hope that Witkoff and Kushner are going to resurrect these peace negotiations because they're meaningless. But Zelensky also said he expects Kushner and Witkoff to finally visit Kyiv in the next few weeks. I really wonder if they will, especially given the scale of Russian attacks on Kyiv. Neither Witkoff nor Kushner strike me as courageous individuals. I think that they feel quite comfortable and safe in the Kremlin, and that is where they would prefer to negotiate from, which of course is ridiculous. But I don't think this war is going to end before winter, even with negotiations. And so I'm just going to go to Roman and then to Will.
Thank you, Alan. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for the space, and wanted to say, Yahoo for me is really it's a news aggregator, and it gets its information from quite a bit of sources, and some that are sketchy, a lot of them that are skewed. So Yahoo, I don't like very much. There might be some credence to that. That Zelensky instructed his probably the entire cabinet to look for a way, if there is a way, because that's the humanitarian way. We're looking for peace. So I think that's it might be what was spoken about, but it's just probably sensationalized, and Yahoo has a tendency to that. So. And then on another subject, so what's up, Dan? What's up with New Jersey? Come on, am I gonna have to come over there and put some cement galoshes on you?
That's very funny, Roman. Will Thiel, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I agree with Ramon and what you've said. Essentially, that look, while they're prosecuting the war, and the war is the momentum is moving toward Ukraine, it still behooves them to demonstrate that they are the people that have all along been the people that said we're ready for a ceasefire, a full ceasefire anytime. So I think that this is part of the cognitive warfare that's going on from Ukraine's side as they start to do well. I don't believe that Budanov or Zelensky or anybody on our side of this believe that what's going on right now, effective as it is going to cause Russia to stop the want to sue for peace this summer. It's possible, but not likely, highly unlikely that we'll get to that point, just because of the intransigence of the Russian system from recognizing reality and doing something about it. Otherwise, the war would have been over a long time ago, 3 years ago. So I think it's all part of the combination that you've got to be fighting the diplomatic front as well as the military front, regardless of if you're doing well on every front. You've got to keep up the air of being the reasonable party in diplomacy. I think that's probably what's going on. I don't think the war is going to end this autumn, but I definitely think by autumn it will become apparent to virtually everybody in the world that Russia can no longer achieve any of its goals in this war, and hopefully that means that people will stop giving this lip service to Ukraine ought to be in concession mode at all. We will be talking in the autumn to winter time about how soon Ukraine is able to get back through diplomacy or fighting its full 1991 borders, is what I suggest will be happening.
Well, we have about 150 days to go in the course of the summer and the fall campaign seasons. And already Ukraine has completely stalled Russia's spring and early summer offensive. I say stalled it. I mean, I can't look anywhere really on the zero line and find anything that resembles a Russian offensive except around Kostyantynivka. I mean, I don't think you can see it around Huliopole. I don't think you can see it around Pokrovsk. Maybe you can see a little bit of it around Kostyantynivka. I don't know. The only place you can actually see an increase in Russian aggression is in its aerial assault on civilian targets all around Ukraine, not just in Kyiv, but as we saw a couple nights ago in Dnipro as well, also in Kharkiv. Russia will continue to hit those primary population centers of Ukraine as hard as possible all summer long, quite possibly increasingly because of frustration on the zero line. We'll wait and see. To Roman and then to Dryfly.
Thanks, Alan. I'll be very brief. Just wanted to say, now is Europe's chance to support Ukraine in full. I think we've spoken about that, but that's so important. That's anybody in Europe, uh, contact your MEPs and do what you can. I mean, it's very different politically in each country, but I'm also a European Union citizen, so I'm doing my part as far as I can from the United States. I'm glad that I can share in both those places, and I'm hoping soon to get my Ukrainian citizenship soon too. So that would be great. Hopefully, maybe I can pull a Sean Pinner. Hoping. All right, guys. I'll be listening here.
Thank you very much, Roman. And Slava Ukraini. Dryfly, go ahead.
Yeah, it's impossible to predict when this war is going to end and with the sequence of events. But I would argue that it isn't going to be something that you can predict on a timeline. It's not going to be a straight line from A to B. If there is a time probability, I would say it's going to probably be something like a Poisson distribution or a binomial. And for people wondering what the hell it is, it's more like a mean time between failure. It could fail tomorrow. It could fail a month from now. It could fail 10 years from now. The probability that it fails tomorrow is small. The probability that it fails a year from now, greater. The probability it lasts 20 years, very, very small again. But you end up with a curve that looks not like a normal curve. It's a very distorted, skewed curve with the heavier probability on the front end to the mean expected value, and then it just tails way the hell off. And it'll be driven by one of the things that we talk about, those black swans. Will's talked about it. Alan, you've talked about it. A lot of people have. And so I would encourage people, next fall or next year or the year after or whatever, it could be as soon as 6 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now. All it's going to take is some catastrophic event that's going to trigger change in a hurry. And I think it was Lenin who said, some decades, nothing happens. Some weeks, decades happen. And I think it's going to be absolutely that kind of a scenario. When it happens, we're going to be shocked at how quickly everything tumbles down. But we're probably not going to see it a month or two in advance. It's going to be steady as she goes, same old, same old, same old, and then something's going to trip it, and it's all going to come tumbling down. And I think it's going to be coupled with either a coup on Putin or his death, one of those two. That's my personal opinion. But it could be a number of other things. It could be Trump's death. and all of a sudden, a whole lot of Republicans are no longer willing to walk the plank for him. In which case, whoever steps in, I mean, it'll be obviously be Vance, but if Vance doesn't get support from the Republican House and Senate, there's nothing he can do. Okay, and at that point, does the Siloviki keep on the same path? I think it's obvious that Putin thinks he's going to win this in negotiations, and he's hanging out for negotiations. He's holding on. He's winning the war enough so that he can win it in negotiations. I'm convinced that's what he believes. But if something breaks, like the front breaks or he dies, that's all off the table. So I wouldn't look for negotiations with Putin. I would look for a world without Putin, either because the Siloviki kill him or because he dies of old age or something. And then all hell breaks loose. How soon could that be? It's hard to say. It's a Poisson distribution. And if you don't know what a Poisson distribution is, go to Wiki or Google it. You'll be familiar with it. It's a tsunami wave shaped curve, not the normal curve. So I will listen.
So, Dryfly, Putin is not that old. He's only in his 70s. He's younger than Trump.
Oh, he's younger. He's my age. He's a little bit older than me. But I've already got friends dying. I'm sure you've had friends that have passed away. He's in a hugely stressful environment, and people are trying to kill him.
And he
The
grew up
clock
in the
is ticking.
Soviet Union.
And he grew up in the Soviet Union. He supposedly has health issues already, and he looks like shit. At least the body double, or either that or his body doubles are aging significantly. So I don't know, but I know this is that, Alan, at the age you and I are at, I mean, we could be, have the tag on our toe, later tonight, anytime now. It's not something I look forward to. But the reality is that as you get older, it's a Poisson distribution, and it's heavily weighted to the front end with a long tail, a long skinny tail. There are people who live to be 110, but for every person that's 110, there's a whole lot of people who die before that to make up that expected average. And I would encourage people, yes, not to be too hopeful, but do not be shocked if it happens much, much sooner. Again, look up Poisson distribution. You see the shape of those curves, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about.
Well,
And I'll listen.
luckily, Dryfly, I have my annual physical tomorrow. I'll tell you what my doctor has to say about that. Roman, go ahead.
Thanks, Alan. Very quickly, just to put a finer point on that exact issue, there's a whole other side of the equation to this. It's that the Russians themselves have to be convinced that they're going to be losing. Okay, and I think one of the Russian telegrams, touched on, I forget which one, that he had speculated that it'll take some time for the population to get used to the idea that Ukraine is going to be winning, and so it'll take some time, maybe a year or so. So that's also, it's a political aspect to it. Over.
Also, very true. The Russian population has to be prepared for defeat. And who does this on behalf of the ordinary Russian? Putin's propaganda machine does this. They, in advance of a defeat, they will prepare the Russian population for acknowledging and accepting defeat in Putin's war against Ukraine. There will be some fall guys. We can probably name them off the tops of our heads: Shoigu, Gerasimov, plenty of other people as well, but not Putin, unless things get really, really bad for him. Dryfly, go ahead.
Oh, well, you stole my thunder on that last one. I was going to say that all is predicated on an orderly end of the conflict. And that's only one scenario, that Putin actually negotiates and saves his skin and his state, and they pull back and they rearm and they do all the things that they were going to do in a worst case scenario, okay, that they didn't think they'd ever have to do. Then they'll have to prepare the population for that. But what if it's what if the Zaporizhia front decides the war is over before the population say it's over? I mean, that's a scenario that people have not wrapped their heads around. And I keep posting that scene from Zhivago because it's still in play. It's still a possibility where troops marching back, after the Kerensky offensive, the front collapsed 250 kilometers in a matter of a few weeks. The population weren't actually polled on that. They weren't asked their opinion. It just was an event. And I think people have to understand that is still every bit as likely to occur. Okay, as some kind. I think it's actually more likely to occur than Putin negotiate an orderly settlement to this war. Everyone expects, what does Putin think? He has to want to do this. He has to want to do that. Well, he may not have a say. I mean, if the front is marching back toward Moscow, what is he going to say? I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it's every bit. It's a definitely a non-zero probability, and I would put it up there actually with as high a probability as Putin negotiating a settlement. I'll be honest, and I don't think Ukraine is going to give him an out that isn't going to make this the last war. They won't. They won't throw cold water on every proposal, but they're not going to give Putin an out that will make it so that Putin can have another bite at the apple in 5
Well,
years. And I'll listen.
really interesting, dry fly. One thing I'll say about negotiations, that the Russian negotiators, whoever they are, Lavrov, maybe he'll make an appearance, I don't know. They will begin with their maximalist demands, and those maximalist demands are an annexation of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk. Uh, Obviously, Ukraine's not going to go for that.
Oh, they're going to drag it out.
Exactly. And if Putin opens these negotiations from a Russian point of view too late, that is as Ukraine is making great advances on the front or is devastating Russia in occupied Ukraine. It's in Ukraine's interest to drag the negotiations out. Just keep talking. First of all, of course, discuss the shape of the table, how many chairs, etc. But just keep talking. So that's point number one, Dryfly.
Oh, I think you're 100% right. And the key to it is that everyone assumes Putin's going to have a vote. Okay, events have a way of taking your vote away from you. And how close are we to that scenario? I really don't know. And in part, it's my optimism that they have that. But the reality is that the OPSEC right now is so tight by Ukrainians. We don't really know what kind of progress they're making. And I mean that on a number of fronts. It's not just the little battles that you see in Zaporizhia and Lyman. It's also starving of the logistics. We see videos of it, but it could be much, much more severe than we know. I mean, much, much more severe. And the average Russian soldier in the trenches could be much more difficult situation than we can ever imagine. So it's really hard for us to know if they see a total collapse of the line, and the Ukrainians are just sort of walking their way toward Rostov. Boy, oh boy, what are the Russian people going to say? There's nothing much they can say. Are they going to sign up and go? I don't think so. I don't think you're going to see a huge, like a Pearl Harbor, like all of a sudden everyone in Moscow, goes to the to the enlistment board and say, hey, send me to save Mother Russia. I mean, I think it's going to get messy, really messy fast. I think that's probably the biggest worry that the West has still to this day. And I can't remember who it was. I think it was on one of these sites. Maybe it was Vatnik Soup who said it. But it was one of your European commenter said the West has to start thinking about what they're going to do if there's 400,000 refugees coming from Russia toward the borders all at once, because that's not an implausibility.
Okay,
No.
it's not an impossibility,
Whoa!
but I would
I
not
just
expect refugees from Russia.
I wouldn't accept them, but I'm telling you, the
No,
thing is that if there's a huge flood, like a world war, like like
no, I
Leon
wouldn't.
Uris
No,
and
no,
Armageddon,
dry fly. I wouldn't even expect Russian refugees. Not accept. Why are there going to be Russian refugees?
if the government collapses, totally collapses, okay, they're already stressed on um, resources, okay, as far as what they have. The places like St. Petersburg are pretty close to the border. Um, I don't think we have fully grasped what a collapse looks like, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm like, fucking bring it, but I think we're closer to that than we are a negotiated settlement. I'll be honest with you. I just do not see a negotiated settlement anytime soon. I mean, like years away. I see no way Putin goes to a negotiated settlement. And I see no way Ukraine gives him an out that he can live with. So the answer is going to be, what does their defeat look like? Because I don't see Ukraine losing. I just don't see it happening. So that kind of a scenario is like the failure of a major complex machine. It's a mean time between failure of a critical component that the whole thing just comes to a grinding halt. It doesn't just kind of slowly reset itself. Parts go flying every fucking place. And I think we're closer to that than we think, than we know. I don't know what it's going to look like. And I'm not as scared of it. I'm not scared of it. It's an inevitability. But
I'm Drew.
when
I'm
people talk about, Putin negotiating, I just laugh. I don't see him negotiating. He'll either die, or it's going to fall apart. One of those two things. And I'll listen.
Oh, it's just gotta fall apart. Yeah, I'm not scared. I'm excited. I could see, 17 corrupt regional governors becoming warlords in a 48-hour period. Yes.
Well, we've already seen the collapse of the Soviet Union, and I don't. I mean, I'll have to go back and look at what happened there in 1991, but I don't think there was a huge outpouring of Russian refugees
We
as
sent in tons of food. We sent in incredible amounts of food to stabilize the population, literally weeks after it happened. I mean, it
Yeah,
was
but there weren't
shocking.
vast amounts of refugees from Russia.
That's because they had food. That's because there was huge amounts of
It's
American
because
citizens.
they lacked money for transport.
Well, yeah, but they walk. You walk from St. Petersburg to Finland, and then you beg to be allowed in.
that is a long trek, dry fly.
And you got to have a visa. And remember, we're talking about the visa regime at the end of the Cold War, not the visa regime that exists now.
That best friend of mine I told you about, whose mother was Ukrainian and was held, she walked something like 250 miles to get out of the eastern part of Germany, to get away from the Soviet uh, zone, to get into the Western zone. And she had no money, no visa, no nothing. It was the collapse of Germany. And she literally threw her stuff in a bag and walked about 250, 300 kilometers, something like
So,
that.
we know at the end of the Second World War, 1945, that was the largest refugee crisis in Europe ever, and it was the next largest refugee crisis was created by Russia's full scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. Uh, Now, one thing I was going to say, if you look at Ukraine's success in the Kharkiv counteroffensive, the Kherson counteroffensive, I'm not sure exactly what tipped us off that Ukraine was going to drive the Russians back in both those counteroffensives. I still feel that someone in the Kherson counteroffensive persuaded Ukraine to let the Russians go because Ukraine had essentially trapped them on the right bank of the Dnipro and could have isolated them there and absolutely destroyed them or taken them captive. I mean, it would have been a Russian Dunkirk. Am I wrong about that, Will?
No, you're 100% right. And we were all talking about at the time, you, me, Chuck, Smokey, everybody, about why Ukraine, why they did sort of let them go. And obviously, we were looking right to Jake Sullivan
Yeah, I thought it
and
was
the Biden
confirmed
administration
now.
at the time, but who knows?
I thought it was confirmed now. Something came out, something was in the last month or so, last couple months. Am I wrong?
I haven't seen it, but yeah, I think we will find out as time goes on that they did, in fact, sort of let a large portion of them go, and I agree with Alan. They should have destroyed or captured everything they could have north of the river and not allowed anybody to take material across.
Back to dry fly, please.
That's what I heard too, and I might have read what Adam read, that there is more clarity coming out about what went on, and it was, in my opinion, there was U.S. pressure to let him go, and I don't know what the pressure was. There was rumors. This has not been confirmed. Rumors that Putin was talking about using tactical nukes to break the the um, the forward motion of the Ukrainians, not to save Kherson, but to save the army group, so to speak. I don't know if I believe that. If it was, it could have been bullshit, and it could have been the U.S. chickening out. I don't know. But the reality is that someone in Washington, from what I read, said you have to let them off the hook, uh, or it's just going to be really, really bad. And I don't know what really, really bad meant. Because they would have destroyed that army group. I don't think there's any doubt about it.
I think there is no doubt about it. So when we are thinking about the collapse of the Russian front lines and the front lines around Kamiansky, so to the west of Orkiv in Zaporizhia, that is probably the place to keep an eye on. But to me, the clue that something really, really bad is about to happen would be once again the complete shutdown of Russian telegram. You know, even though Putin said he's shutting Russian telegram down, hasn't happened. There are still frontline forces in Ukraine that rely on Russian telegram for communication. Obviously, the mill bloggers inside Russia use Russian telegram uh, to write their stuff about the war. But if Putin doesn't want the Russian people to know what is actually happening inside Ukraine, then he has to shut down completely Russian telegram.
Well, he
Dryfly?
has to shut down the internet in full if he wants to stop it.
You're correct. He has to shut down the internet in full, which Russia can do. It's been instructed how to do that by China. And it also will probably go after just about every single Russian with a VPN this summer. Even before it does that, Russia has already passed these laws that about VPNs, and if you have a VPN, you're going to prison inside Russia. Dryfly?
I agree with all of that. Per Telegram, my read, because I was watching this pretty close on some other spaces, the guys that handle more of the tactical stuff. Guys like David's, he's like Chuck. He really looks at the tactics. And they were watching that Telegram. All of a sudden, Telegram went back up for the soldiers. They had really cut back on Telegram, even for the front. But in the last, I want to say 2 weeks, they have absolutely relaxed that. And to a great extent, it's because they're losing so much control of places like Zaporizhia. I mean, their officers have zero ability to 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 control the people that they're infiltrating at all. Not even a little bit. And so they have really, really backed off on that. Um, so I agree with you. I think you're going to see a Swan Lake scenario, that it's all going to go dark if it gets to that point. The thing is that it could get to that point sooner then they're able to actually even shut it down. If the front collapses, and I don't mean a collapse like, everybody surrenders. I mean, it's mostly like they just start walking away from their posts and the Ukrainians start moving forward and there's nobody there. And they move forward a little more and there's nobody there. And they move forward a little more and they're not even booby trapped. There's nothing. And they're starting to get surrenders. People who are there, who are cut off from their other troops, all of a sudden just immediately surrender. And there's no drones. I mean, that's what I think a collapse of the front is going to look like. It's not going to be, like, Pickett's charge. It's going to be just they disappear. And by the way, that's what happened after the Kerensky offensive. Kerensky's forces pushed and pushed and pushed. They pushed the Germans back pretty significantly, took huge losses. But when they culminated, there was nothing left. It was just a shell of an army. And they just fell back. They fell away from the front. And I think if it's going to happen, that's what it's going to look like. The other one, and I talked to Chuck about it when you guys were on, was the other one is that they have a colonel or a general just basically save himself, save his army, do a Prigozhin, but instead of going to Moscow, he turns himself into the Ukrainians. He says, "I'm done. We're surrendering en masse, and I'm not going to kill all my people. We're going to actually, give you this front because we are done." And surrender, not in a formal surrender, but just basically allow the Ukrainians through. And I don't think the Russians would even know. I mean, the Kremlin, the military leadership would even know until it was too late, until it was way too late. I
And
wouldn't be shocked at
Tri-Fly,
all.
I don't think there's a Russian commander with such a humane spirit in his body.
I don't think they do either, but I think they might want to save themselves. And the only way they're ever going to save themselves and the direct officer corps that are with them is if they can't trust the Kremlin. Okay, that's obvious. You'll end up in the gulag. So your only option is either to surrender or to die in place. And so far, most of them have chosen to die in place. I would expect at some point, some of them might consider a surrender, but they're going to have to do it very surreptitiously. They're going to have to do it through someone like through Budanov, through direct communication, through negotiations, and then one day, boom, they're going to poke through. And my understanding is that that's what the Russians think is going to happen to Ukraine. That some corrupt Ukrainian general is going to turn over the front to the Russians. I think it's foolish to even drink that. That might have happened in 2022. It maybe did happen in Kherson, but it isn't going to happen on this front. Not now.
No, that's not going to happen now in Ukraine. Will Thiel, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just want to provide a bit of color to what you were talking about in relation to the internet shutdown that's going to be required to close down communications in Russia. And because, the mechanics of how that happens is the Russian government, like the Soviet government, loves to legalize things, likes to put, you can follow the Russian regulations and decrees that get published to see where things are going and make reasonable predictions, not necessarily when, but how things go, because the Soviets and the Russians love to legalize the things that they're doing. And so, what passed a few months ago that we were kind of chuckling about, that, when they went through another round of banning VPNs, and then they said that we're going to require everybody to register use of their VPN, and we're going to tax them for gigabytes download and all this stuff. We were talking about the fact that everybody's just going to avoid this thing, and they did, and they have, right? So now you've got little cottage manufacturers producing VPN setups and servers that are doing it by sort of word of mouth rather than going through the app stores and things like that. So, but what Russia's doing is setting up the situation where multiple civil penalties can then subject you to criminal penalties, because all the, they always like to say, well, we're doing everything and it's legal. Well, when they start arresting people for having VPNs, they're going to arrest people not for freedom of speech issues. They're going to arrest them on taxation issues so that they can legalize it and make it look palatable to the rest of society of what they're doing isn't totalitarian. It's simply in law enforcement. And the same thing happens with relation to mobilization, right? If you get multiple civil penalties for not registering, for not reporting, not updating your details, all these sorts of things, then when you get captured and mobilized, you're being mobilized because of your violation of the rules of registration, not because they're desperate for warm bodies. And so that's what has happened in Russia, is the language being used by the FSB in their communications, their explanations of how things would be worked in Roskomnadzor and otherwise. They're now talking about when this happens, when these shutdowns happen, the duration of them and things. So they're no longer talking about this as a speculative, if we need to do this. They're now talking in open communications between government agencies like the FSB and Roskomnadzor about the mechanics of how it's going to work when they shut the internet down. And so that's definitely coming out.
Yeah, I think it's definitely coming too. And it is a signal we should be watching for. Bruce, go ahead.
One of the things, I stepped away for a minute. So if you guys were talking about this, I apologize. But, listening to Dry Fly, I think one of the things that's interesting to contemplate is you've got the situation on the front line, and maybe the front line deteriorates for Russia. But I'm kind of curious of what the stability is of the occupying presence in a place like Tokmak, which, if you're talking about the Southern Front, Tokmak is obviously very important in the occupied territory. Like, how strong is the infrastructure, is the occupying infrastructure there, the quote unquote police force? And how strong is the resistance that we don't hear a lot about, but we know it exists? And, I just wonder if and when things really start going south for the Russians, how it's going to play out. Like, are we just going to see a bunch of guys burning files and jumping in there, and splitting town in places like Tokmak and Melitopol, or what the resistance is going to do there as it exists? And maybe we can't answer that question. It's just something I've been thinking about.
That is a great question. I'm not sure we can answer it. I do know that Melitopol and Tokmak are bandit country, as Chuck calls Melitopol and Tokmak, and that means the Ukrainian resistance in those parts of occupied Ukraine is quite strong, quite well organized and capable. But where else is Ukrainian resistance well organized, strong, and capable? Apparently, still around Mariupol and around Berdyansk, and quite possibly in some places of Luhansk and Donetsk. But when do these resistance forces in occupied territory spring up? Not until they are assured of support from Ukraine, either through an advance of Ukrainian arms, or as a result of Ukraine's ability to supply them. In this case, most likely, well, by drones. Um, so it's a wait and see situation. You know, look, when Chuck and I were in Ukraine, we actually met uh, a medical officer in the Far East who had been in Kherson before the liberation, and he was hidden by Ukrainian citizens. And then when Ukraine liberated Kherson, Yuri was freed, and he joined the Ukrainian military, became the chief medical officer of a brigade in the east. But it, this, I simply tell this story as a way to talk about the unseen resilience of resistance in occupied Ukraine. They were able to hide this doctor for months and months and months. And so we don't know everything that resistance can do in occupied Ukraine, but I assure you they are ready to do all kinds of things. Look,
I'll just say quickly I'm looking at the map now, and I'm obviously not the first person who's thought of this, but there is the Tokmak River, and there's a couple highways that need to cross that river to get from, say, Tokmak to Melitopol. And I'm sure as it's somebody in the Russian special forces, I mean, in the Ukrainian special forces and/or the resistance, has a plan for blowing some bridges at some point.
Absolutely. And you know, probably the very first and most basic thing that occupation resistance forces do: eyes on target, eyes on the road, uh, writing down what the Russian usual schedule might be, listing numbers of Russian forces here and there. So this is what resistance does in occupied Ukraine right now. And that is the job they have and that they're filling. Look, but before Adam and I close this space here on Volya Radio tonight, and by the way, you can listen to this broadcast again on the Volya Radio Spotify archive. But before we close this space, I want to bring everyone's attention to opportunities you have to support Ukraine in this summer when Ukraine is turning the tide against Russia. All those opportunities are in tweets right up in the nest. Adam, there must be half a dozen, 8, 9, 10, uh, maybe even a dozen opportunities for people to choose and support Ukraine. It's everything from supporting our great friend War Dog to helping the project at Yale University track the Ukrainian children that have been abducted by Russia. It is because of everything that Natty Raymond did at the Humanitarian Research Lab at Yale that both Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova were indicted as war criminals. I just saw Natty and Chuck and Ben Goldhagen in New Haven a few days ago, and hopefully our discussion will be available to all of you here on Volya Radio in the Spotify archive, the audio. It was a great hour-long conversation, and it will be available at some point in the Spotify archive. You can also find it in a few days over on YouTube at Indications and Warnings. I really encourage everyone to give it a listen or a look. But tonight, I really invite everyone to support Ukraine as Ukraine turns the tide on Russia. It's happening, and I think Russia has reached its high water mark in Ukraine, Adam.
Yeah, the low bar has been set in it. Yeah, I really hope so, and I really think so. And yeah, I really hope it starts tonight, honestly, with some major drone incursions on some part on and travel disruptions and pillars of smoke and oily rain to dampen some spring parties at the Petersburg Economic Forum. But yeah, hopefully. Oh, Romane, що ви кажете?
Адам, пане Адам, добре. Я хотів сказати, I wanted to say, if these American influencers in St. Petersburg are getting alarms right now, that would be so good.
Yeah, I would love it. If it was started tonight, and then we can all pat ourselves on the back. Just kidding. Because we know who actually did it. It was the defenders of Ukraine. So, Alan, I guess I'll just say Slava Ukraini.
Heroam Slava.
Slava
Here
Nazi.
on Slava.
Smert Voraham.
Мерзворогам.
Мертвогам.
Окей, і тоді скоро побачимось.
Skoro Pobachimus.
Побачимось.
Botumus.